Hello and welcome to this NDTV special. Ever since he left India to go back to academia, Raghuram Rajan has maintained a dignified silence on his, to put it mildly, eventful stint as RBI governor. Until now, when he's in India to promote his new book, I Do What I Do, and he's been on the front page of every single newspaper since he started giving those interviews. But he now joins us on NDTV. Thanks very much indeed for being here with us. You're not surprised at all, I assume, of the fact that you are on the front page of every single newspaper, given the context in which you left and the context in which you returned.
Well, unfortunately, I mean, I want to look forward and not dwell on the past. There was a lot of attention. Of course, I used to think when I was in the job as governor that it was because people thought I'd drop hints on monetary policy.
Right.
But it still continues, so there's something else.
Right. Before we go to the future, I do want to go a little bit back to the past, and I want to begin, as it were, with the end, which was your parting of ways with the government and your decision to go back. Now, you must have read a Karan Thapar piece in which he wrote that unimpeachable sources have told me that Mr. Rajan was offered a 2-year extension. However, the problem was his inability to get a further extension of leave of absence from Chicago University without losing his valuable tenure. True or false?
False, because actually Chicago never put a restriction on me. It was happy to continue giving me leave to the extent that I needed it. And I have, so that was never a constraint. I could have got more leave.
Okay, so Chicago was happy to extend your terms. Should you have required?
Should I have required? They just wanted to know in advance because they had to plan for the new year, that's all.
So were you surprised when you read this? Were you surprised when you came across it?
Well, Karan and I had an email exchange on it, and I told him off the record, since I was in silent mode, what the facts were.
Okay, so if it wasn't then Chicago, then what was it?
Look, the reality is I had a 3-year term.
Yes.
The term came to an end.
Right.
So if there had to be a new term or an extension or something, there had to be an agreement with the government.
Yes.
There was no agreement with the government. They did not offer me a new contract, and that's where it ended.
Okay, but had they offered you a contract, you were happy to stay on?
I mean, we were trying to discuss what that might look like. Since there was no sense of what that might look like. Yes, that's where
it ended. Because I remember you wrote in your farewell letter to the RBI, you said that inflation is the target zone. You were setting out some of the steps that you had initiated and where we stood on that. You said inflation is in the target zone, but the Monetary Policy Committee that will set policy has yet to be formed. Moreover, the bank cleanup, having already brought more credibility to bank balance sheets, is still ongoing. And you said, while I was open to seeing these developments through on due reflection and after consultation with the government, I want to share with you that I'll be returning to academia.
It's a very convoluted way of saying we didn't reach an agreement.
Right. No, but it does suggest that you wanted to get some of this unfinished agenda done. It wasn't as if you were in a hurry to go back.
I was open. I did want to see, more than inflation, of course, the committee was important. I think it's been structured very, very well.
Right.
It was more the cleanup, which I thought was extremely important, and that delay would cause problems for the Indian economy, that if we didn't get the cleanup done on time. And that required constant adjustment, because we need to say what was working.
Sure.
If it wasn't working, bring something more new so that we can actually make this process come to an end. It can't be a long drawn-out process, because then banks feel the pressure, don't actually...
Sure, but it does require kind of sustained monitoring and observation, which is what you were planning
absolutely.
to do.
And given that I had been there, structuring these new structures with my team, I had a good sense of perhaps how to carry it through. Yeah.
No, that's fair enough. So then, if it wasn't that, then what? I mean, why do you think that they were not keen to?
I'm the wrong guy to ask.
Were you ever given an indication of it, though?
No, I can't go into the details of our discussion, but there was no agreement at the end.
There was no agreement. I want to ask you, in hindsight, given now that we finally publicly know your views on demonetization and that you weren't wildly enthused by it, Do you think that could have been a factor?
Look, again, it's incorrect, improper for me to speculate because I don't know what the specific issues were.
Right. Okay, let's look at demonetization then, because you have set the record straight finally on that, and you do that right at the introduction because you know that people like me would be asking you that question right off the bat. And you said a couple of things. One of the things you said is that you had an oral conversation on demonetization. I believe this was sometime in February 2016 with the government, where you said that there might be long-term benefits, but you felt the likely short-term economic costs would outweigh them. And you said you made these views known in no uncertain terms. Subsequently, you said that there was a separate note which the RBI sent to the government where it sort of outlined the pros and cons, but clearly pointed out that this would take preparation, it would need a certain amount of time. So let me just begin by asking you that as far as the short-term economic costs that you felt would outweigh the gains, what sort of costs were you what of concern to you?
Again, I don't want to go to the details.
No, but broadly
of
speaking.
That. Let me sort of step back and say what a monetary economist would think about when something like this happened. On the one hand, if you're not prepared on day one with all the currency that's being replaced with new currency, currency is important for economic activity, especially if you can't substitute with checks or credit cards immediately. So in areas where you use the currency, you would have a chilling of economic activity. You would see a dramatic slowdown in economic activity. That's one.
Which is what has happened.
Well, you're seeing some evidence of that certainly in the GDP numbers. Again, it's hard to attribute precisely how much to demonetization, how much to other stuff, but certainly that's a concern. A second, I think, factor that you have to worry about is that some of these we're saying there's a chilling of economic activity that feeds into things like investment and so on, but it also can actually put some companies out of business that are operating on relatively thin margins, thin buffers. They see sales plummet, they can't sort of ride out the storm, so to speak, they go out of business. Now, over time, new companies will come in, but in the short run, there's disruption, which extends into the medium term because these guys haven't been replaced very quickly. Third element is, of course, effects on sentiment and investment. If there is a concern that this is part of a long, drawn-out campaign, it doesn't finish on this day, there will be investigations, there will be saying, how much does it affect consumption and investment? Those are concerns.
So all these you're trying to paint the broad brushstrokes
here.
This is what you said, but you said that you're saying that these are the sorts of concerns that a monetary economist would have. Were you to take a step like that without fully working it through? Okay, but as far as conveying this to the government is concerned, can I ask you who in the government did you convey to?
I think that would be going into more detail than I think is fair.
But again, broadly?
I've said before that it was conveyed to when I say no uncertain terms, it was conveyed to whoever mattered.
Whoever would be taking those decisions, presumably.
Whoever would be involved in the decisions.
Okay, but there's something which I wanted to check with you, which seemed to me somewhat of a contradiction, but correct me if I'm wrong, because you seem to suggest that part of the problem with demonetization or a step like demonetization is the implementation aspect of it and the planning aspect of it. But separately, in another one of your lectures, which you again refer to in the book, you seem to suggest that the idea itself may not be the best way to solve the black money problem. You say, and I quote, "Unfortunately, my sense is that the clever find ways around it."
Yeah. No, so I think what I was talking about just now to you as a monetary economist was the effects on the economy from that. There's also the question of, do you catch the guys that you want to catch? And do they find ways around it? I think the worst possible combination of circumstances where you don't catch the guys, but you still have the effect on the economy.
No, so then, in a sense, when you say to the question, do you catch the guys, you seem to have suggested in that lecture that actually it doesn't really work because people break up black money into small bits and then filter it into the system, which essentially is what has happened, as we know now.
Well, we in India, I think there's the Wharton people have coined the word jugaad.
Yes.
We're pretty good at jugaad. So if you know India well, you should recognize that a lot of jugaad will happen. People will find ways around it. And you know, it's economic arbitrage.
Right.
With a touch of illegality about it.
Right. So you're basically paying a cost to try and convert your black into white, or you're basically entering it into the banking system.
Now remember that that cost, if you're not caught, is offset by the interest you've started earning.
Right.
That stuff was sitting in your basement.
Right.
And eroding at the inflation rate.
Right.
Now you put it back into the banks or into the formal financial system.
Right.
This is actually an important point that sometimes gets missed. You know, people say we have formalized savings. Well, they were financing the system anyway,
right,
but in an interest-free way.
Right.
The people who had cash were essentially funding the RBI, and through the RBI funding the government. Once they put the cash back into the system, they started earning interest on it,
right,
which is why, in a sense, the RBI dividend has gone down by
That's
so
right.
much.
By almost 50%. The reason why I'm going over all this with you is because there was this confusion about when exactly the planning of demonetization started, and an impression was sought to be created that it started well in advance of the announcement, perhaps even during your tenure. But as you made amply clear in the book, that wasn't the case.
No.
Yeah.
Let me be very clear that what I said in the book was, after we gave our note, a committee was set up,
right,
and started the process of discussion.
Okay.
Now, it never, in my view, came back to us as, here's a decision you have to make,
right,
or here is the timing that we want to do this in.
Okay, that's fair enough. So it didn't come back to you as a decision. A committee had been set up, but the actual decision was never during your time, right? So when you left,
as far as I understand,
as far as you know, I mean, surely you would have known as long as you were in the saddle. So you were there till you left in September 2016, I believe.
But preparation can go on without a decision on a date.
Right.
It can be, let us be prepared just in case.
Just in case. No, the reason again why I'm asking is because you leave in September 2016, and then boom, literally within a month or 2 months, in November, you have demonetization. I mean, that seems like an extremely tight window to turn something around, something which, as you yourself said, requires a lot of planning.
Well, again, let me say that the whole process of new notes, for example, we had started the process of redesigning all the notes.
Okay.
And the 2000, the 500, the 1000, the new 1000, there's a new 1000, all of them, in a sense, had been approved by the RBI board in May during my term.
Right.
Now, that was an input into the preparation process, if you will, even if it wasn't explicitly considered as an input.
Okay.
Because you would have to replace the old notes with the new notes.
Right.
Design takes time.
Right.
That was done.
Okay.
So to say that none of that was done would be incorrect. But again, as I said earlier, a monetary economist would want you to print 100% of the stuff that was taken out. We clearly weren't there.
Right. That's an important point. Do you feel now, and I'm sure this gives you no joy, that if you look at the impact of what it did to the economy, if you look at the manner in which it was implemented, that greater attention was paid to the more cautious approach that you were advocating?
No. Look, again, I want to say that we still don't know the full impact of demonetization.
Right.
That many of the benefits that are sometimes cited may be longer term. I think the single most important potential benefit is tax compliance.
Right.
We still don't know what the reality there is.
Sure.
In the short term, we haven't seen an enormous increase. We've seen some increase, which has been pointed out in the economic survey.
Right.
So to offset the costs, which people estimate between 1 and 2% of GDP, let us say 1.5% of GDP, about 2 lakh crores, there has to be a substantial amount of benefit down the line.
We haven't seen that yet.
And so if you asked, given the information that has come in till now,
yes,
and ignoring any possible benefits or costs down the line,
yes,
both of which can be there, was it a decision that should have been taken? I think at this point, the answer is pretty obvious.